For this lesson, we're going to be solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. And for the warm-up, I just want you to think about the different ways we've learned to solve quadratic equations. First way we learned back in Chapter 8, we learned about factoring. And then at the beginning of this chapter, we talked about graphing. And then in the last lesson, we talked about completing the square. So we've got a few different ways to do it. And then today, you're going to be able to add one more to this list. So these are the ones you already knew. You're going to be able to add the quadratic formula to this list. The nice thing about the quadratic formula is that it always works, but it probably is also the longest method to use. It's not the hardest necessarily, but it takes the most steps. So the quadratic formula, it will give you the roots to any quadratic equation. It doesn't matter if it's prime. It doesn't matter if it's got one root, two roots. This will always tell you the answers. Because if it's prime, you'll get no solution. If it's got one root, you'll get one root. If it's got two roots, you'll get two different answers. Doesn't matter. As long as you have it in standard form, you just plug it into this quadratic formula, it'll give you the answers. Some of you may love this way, others of you may think it's long and complicated. Up to you on how much you use it. Okay? So when it's in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Gotta equal 0. We've talked about that before. And this standard form, we've talked about it in factoring before. You get your equation. And this equation seems complicated, but once you do the quadratic formula enough, doing x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is easy. You can tell I said that pretty fast because I've used the quadratic formula more times than I can count. And once you get used to it, it's not that hard to memorize. I'm not going to expect you to memorize that right now, but I guarantee some of you will memorize it within a couple days just because you'll use it enough. Okay? All you're doing is plugging in these values. Minus whatever b is, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Notice, you always have a 4 here, you always have a 2. Those are the constants. The b's, a's, and c's will change depending on what the equation is. So let's look at this equation. X squared minus 12x equals negative 20. We want to solve using the quadratic formula. And hopefully you haven't already forgotten that we need one side to equal 0 before we can use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to add 20 to each side. So I have x squared minus 12x plus 20 equals 0. Now this is in standard form, so I can use the quadratic formula. I just have to identify what a, b, and c are. A is the number in front of x squared. I don't see 1, which means it must be 1. B, number in front of my x term, negative 12. C is my constant at the end, positive 20. Now that I know what a, b, and c are, I can use my quadratic formula, which is minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now I'm just going to plug those things in. Minus, that minus sign's always in front. B is negative 12, plug in b. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 12 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 20, all over 2 times a, which is 1. Keep on simplifying. Minus negative 12 is the same thing as positive 12. Plus or minus, always keep writing that plus or minus. Square root, negative 12 squared is 144. Minus 4 times 1 times 20 is 80. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. That gives me 12. Plus or minus the square root, 144 minus 80 is 64, all over 2, which means I get 12 plus or minus. And notice, we're already building in this plus or minus, so you don't have to write plus or minus square root. because it's already built into the formula. Square root of 64 is 8 all over 2. This is the second to last step you would do. We've got 12 plus or minus 8 over 2, so I'm going to get two different answers. I could have x equals 12 plus 8 over 2, or I could get x equals 12 minus 8 over 2. Well, 12 plus 8 is 20. 20 over 2 is 10. So there's one of my answers, x equals 10. My other answer would be 12 minus 8 over 2. 12 minus 8 is 4 over 2, and 4 over 2 gives me 2. There are my two answers, and I'll write them up here just so you can see them. X equals 10, x equals 2. All it is to do this method, you're just plugging numbers into a formula. Granted, it's not the easiest formula we've worked with all year, but it's just a formula. You plug the numbers in, you evaluate it with the same steps every single time, you get your two answers, and you're done. Hopefully, not too intimidating, but we will do some more examples in case you think it is. And I guess even if you think it isn't.